For some peculiar reason, this type of news sort of came up today. Well, when I say today, I'm talking about January 27, where this news sort of came out. Where Tony Khan is apparently getting a lot more in the weeds with AEW's creative now. Apparently, he was a little more hands off. Apparently, he wasn't as involved for whatever reasons, And now he's getting more and more involved here. So let's read this write up here from Wrestling Inc. There's been plenty going on with AEW ever since Dynamite and Collision began simulcasting on TBS, TNT, and Max to start the year, but last week's slew of shows may have been the most eventful of the simulcast era. On Dynamite, former rivals Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay set their differences aside and took out the Don Callis family in a wild opening scene. It was then topped on Collision by a wild brawl between Powerhouse Hobbs and Big Bill in a highly acclaimed face-to-face segment between Mariah May and Toni Storm, which saw Storm revert back to her timeless persona. While it remains to be seen whether the shows lead back to a burst of momentum for the promotion, it's at least helped out with the vibes backstage. Oh boy. Fightful Select reports that those within AEW were understandably pumped, quote unquote, for how well Collision came off. Just as notable, though, is the belief that AEW owner Tony Khan has been, quote, been more in the weeds, unquote, of AEW creative recently, coinciding with these big angles. Latter news is eye-catching, as Khan has long been considered AEW's creative point man, though he has received help from the likes of longtime producer QT Marshall, Jennifer Pepperman, Will Washington, RJ City, and others. It's possible, however, that Khan has taken a step back over the last few months in order to focus on his non-wrestling duties, including his executive positions with the Jacksonville Jaguars and Fulham FC. Though Fulham's Premier League campaign remains ongoing, the Jaguars just wrapped up the NFL season and their head coaching search, presumably freeing up Khan to shift gears back towards AEW. From what I understand, from what I've been gathering from sports news outfits, the Jaguars didn't do good this season. They haven't been doing really good, and there's been some issues with the head coach. I think a lot of fans were expecting the head coach to be fired, but Shad Khan's not doing anything. And that's what I'm understanding, right? It's like there's trouble in management. The chain of command is not really going well. Oh, the GM. Okay, they hope the GM would be fired. So, okay, that's interesting. So Pedro in the chat, after reading this article, has exactly. Oh, he has been fired. Okay, thank you. Okay, but Pedro in the chat, after reading this article, had the exact same question that I had. If it wasn't Tony Khan who was handling it, then who? Who was taking it over then? Who was doing the creative? Which is odd, because I do agree that, typically speaking, from everything I've ever heard about how AEW functions backstage in the creative department, is that everything runs through Tony. He's got a bunch of stuff, bunch of people coming in and pitch ideas and set up plans and whatever, but everything runs through Tony. Tony has to give a stamp of approval before anything goes on TV. That's essentially it. So is this a thing where there was some mysterious individual in AEW who was in charge? You know, I think what this actually means, I don't think that Tony was absent from running AEW and we're running creative in AEW at the very least. I think this is more a question of Tony perhaps delegating a lot of tasks backstage, especially in regards to certain angles, certain wrestlers, which is, to be between all of us, is a good idea. I think it's a sane idea on top of that. But maybe was a little more detached than what he usually is, right? So if he's returned, if he has indeed returned into the position that he was previously, where he's a lot more hands-on, and what we get then is like that terrific angle on last week's Dynamite, where that opened up the show, and a good Collision. I enjoyed Collision this week quite a bit, actually. I thought it was like even outside of the Tony Storm stuff, I thought Collision was very good. Maybe this is indeed an indication that Tony is back in the swing of things. And is that a good or a bad thing? I mean, that's legitimately a question that you can ask yourself. Is this a good or a bad thing that Tony Khan is suddenly that Tony Khan is going to be back with his hands deeper into the dough, essentially, to knead all of the bread together to make wrestling shows? Is that a good thing? Because, one could argue that Tony's booking rhythms and his booking styles have kind of went a little sideways for a long time. It's been a while now that booking that the creative on AEW is a little uninspired and sometimes just outright bad, and some very weird decisions about certain people getting pushed over others, and there's a lot of very, very strange things that are going on. Was all of this a symptom of Tony Khan not being around as much? I couldn't tell you, but I don't know if I'm the guy who, if I'm going to sit here and start clapping, going, finally, order will be restored in All Elite Wrestling. I like, even before we started getting this news, a lot of people started questioning what the hell is going on with Tony, right? 2023 was, the brochachos that happened under his watch. There weren't any reports that he was passing the buck to anyone. It's like, this is the kind of stuff that happens, right? And, we're getting championship celebrations and all this stuff. And I don't know. Is this a good sign, or is this just coincidental? Or maybe Tony sat everyone down. I was like, okay, so this is my vision for AEW this year, which is something he should do. Don't get me wrong. He's the boss. He's the head of creative. He's the guy that holds all the strings. So, all right, this is what I want you to do this year. This is my vision for creative. Right? So, in no way is this report saying Tony Khan is back in control. What the report is saying, in my feeling, is Tony Khan is paying a lot more attention than what he did recently. And maybe that will reignite some stuff. Maybe that'll get people excited. And maybe that will curb some some bad impulses that some of the creative team have. Maybe he'll be able to bring that back. Maybe, who knows? We might get the return of Mid-South Tony. Who knows? But honestly, like the way things are presented here, and especially since this is aggregated, I unfortunately don't have access to Fightful Select. But if I'm looking at what's been aggregated here, this feels like it was part of a larger report, and everyone sort of zeroed in on, Tony Khan's going to be he's going to be deeper in the weeds now. I was like, okay, yeah. I mean, it is interesting to note, but I don't know if it's big news, and I don't know if we should be to the point where like we're making articles about this. I feel like this is kind of aggregator brain that's working here in this particular circumstance. I don't know if we're going to see big sweeping changes. If it does means if the show has his full attention, okay? If the show has his full attention and we can get better, more streamlined shows like we did with Collision this week, as opposed to, some of Dynamite's worst offenses, I am completely okay with that. But I mean, this is a company that on my end has exhausted any goodwill it had. I keep them at arm's length. I don't hate AEW by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm not as hopeful for things to turn around as, let's say, 4 or 5 years ago, where I was like, it's going to be fine. Here I'm like, well, I don't have a gut feeling that says this is going to be a change for the better, or this is going to be a change at all. AEW for me is in a position where they have to put their money where their fucking mouth is and show don't tell. They got to do the thing instead of promising me that they're going to do the thing, right? They can tell me restore the feeling all they want, but it's not because you tell me the feeling's restored that I'm going to start feeling that restored feeling. That's all. I respect him trying to delegate. The delegation stinks. Time to get back to the roots. Well, because the delegates are all, anyway, not all, but where did they come from, right? A long time ago when they were bringing in, the Pat Bucks and the Sanjays, and this was way before Jennifer Pepperman, and they were all bringing in these guys who's, what did they do? Where did they work? They work for WWE. What are they bringing? Their WWE experience. So they're bringing what they know from Vince into AEW, and they're like, well, no, this is how wrestling is today. And you're like, I don't want another WWE. Like, no one wants another WWE. Even TNA fans don't want to be another WWE. They want TNA to be TNA, right? So it's like, it's frustrating. It's frustrating in that regard. Because you end up with these people where it's like, all we want is something different, but then they're bringing in all these folks who have never done anything but do Vince's vision of pro wrestling. And I was really excited, and I still remember, I was really excited at the idea of a wrestling promotion being run by people other than Vince and his crew, right? Other than Vince and his group. Always the same people in charge of pro wrestling. There was a time in the mid-2000s where 2010s where you could sit, if you took a moment to sit back and look at the landscape, and all you could see was like, these are all of the people running wrestling, in WWE specifically, creatively and whatnot. These are all the same people who were running wrestling 20, 30 years ago. It's never changed. They had Vince, of course, and Bruce Pritchard and Patterson and it's always been the same people. Now you're like, AEW, fresh start, new people, new ideas. But no, we're going to bring in, WWE pilled people. And what are they going to do? Well, they're going to be like, well, sports entertainment, it's the wave of the future. But we end up getting the same thing. Like, I cannot say I'm really surprised. I keep forgetting while also running a wrestling company, he has to work with football and soccer. So I give him some leeway. Yeah. But you see and I agree, but like the guy, like King of the North said, right? I think you give him some elbow room because he's running himself ragged, managing like 3 different organizations, right? Not managing, but working for 3, right? There's one that he sees overseas from top to bottom. Anyway, but you got to have your lieutenants on the field that you can trust will be able to perpetuate your vision. Now, the problem that I think AEW has is that Tony Khan either doesn't have or cannot properly communicate his vision and keep people to stick to that, because if you watch an episode of Dynamite in 2024, I think there are moments you can actually see multiple visions of what pro wrestling should be. Now, if Tony sat people down, his creative people down, I was like, this is the vision we have. This is how I see my promotion moving forward. You guys figure it out. You guys have to make this work. But here's my vision, which is how it should go, which is how it should happen. Then he delegates a lot of the tasks. Then he gets the pitches, and then he thumbs through them, and then he signs off on the ones he wants to keep. The others are put in the shredder, and we move on, right? And things are produced in accordance to his vision. I remember when he was starting off AEW, right? He seemed to have a vision, right? When he talk about just as simply as saying, there will be no backstage vignettes. Everything is going to happen in or around the ring in this company. We're not going to be doing, segments backstage or all of that. Do you remember this when he said, and that is a vision. That's part of a vision. This is how I perceive my company to advance. This is how I see it stylistically. And these are the parameters within which y'all have to keep up. Y'all have to work within to come up with your ideas. That's how it should. I feel like we've lost whatever vision Tony had, and I don't know if it's Tony himself who sort of loosened the reins or switched his vision, or if he just became a little more loosey-goosey with it. You always hear Tony Khan is a people pleaser, that he's too soft. He's too soft until he's too hard with people, right? Here's the extreme double standard that people can't seem to get a grip on. Either Tony Khan he's too soft, or he's incredibly harsh. But he can't be both. He can't be both. You had to pick a lane here. Either he's too soft or he's too hard. Anyway. So ultimately, the vision that he has should be able to trickle down to his lieutenants, right? They should be able to absorb what he's saying and say, okay, you don't want, okay, so in this vision that Tony has, which resembles Mid-South Wrestling, well then, we're not doing championship celebrations. We can't do championship celebrations because that doesn't make sense in this vision that we have. So we try to find something else to do. We just try to do something else, right? And that's the crux of the problem, where it's like the lieutenants either don't seem to get it, which could be their fault, which could be Tony's fault, which could be a combination of both, or there's just too many people in a room. And that's the other problem with the vision, is that if you have too many people in charge, They will all these people will have different interpretations of the vision. So if you have 20 people in a creative meeting and they all go off to do their own things and they all have 20 visions of the vision and come back, then it doesn't work. You need to trim that down to a couple of very trustworthy people who understand where you want to go with this, right? Who completely get what is your vision for this company. Not what sports entertainment should be, not what wrestling should be in 25, what you want pro wrestling to be in 2025. And then you pass it on to a couple of people who then become the lieutenants, then carry the word, carry the action. Like, that's how a proper structure should work. But I understand there's a lot of guys in this company and gals who have a lot of power over their creative. A lot of say in what they can and cannot do, which is always a bad thing. Have you ever heard in pro wrestling of a time where a wrestler had much creative influence over his booking or hers? Had so much influence over their creative that it turned out to be so great for the company, that it was so good? Have you ever heard of that? Because it's not. Anyway, that was a bit of a side rant there, but so ultimately, to come back to Pedro the Fifth's point, is that yes, you can give him some leeway, but also you can't. Because he should be responsible enough to communicate his vision of pro wrestling to his base, to his lieutenants. Actually, not his base, so that they can get the base back